The sun had barely risen when Amara wandered past the familiar trail, deeper into the forest than she'd ever dared to go. The trees here whispered differently, older, quieter, as if holding secrets. Her brothers had warned her not to stray. The elders say lions hunt beyond the bend, they teased. But Amara wasn't afraid. She wasn't reckless, either, just curious in a way that couldn't be taught. She was supposed to be gathering firewood for her grandmother's morning tea. Instead, she followed a strange sound, soft and broken, like something calling for help in a voice too small to be heard by most. She stepped through a patch of tangled shrubs, ignoring the scratch on her arm. That's when she saw it. A tiny lion cub, curled up beneath a fallen log, its fur matted with mud and twigs. It was shaking. Its ribs showed through its skin, and its eyes, wide and golden, were filled with something that stopped Amara in her tracks. Fear, yes, but also trust. Somehow, the cub didn't run or snarl. It just stared at her like it had been waiting. For a moment, Amara froze. Every warning she'd ever heard echoed in her head. Wild animals are not friends. Wild animals belong in the wild. But her heart thudded louder than the warnings. This cub was alone. There was no mother nearby. No fresh paw prints. No other signs of life. And something inside her whispered, "He won't survive the night." Amara took off her shawl and wrapped it gently around the cub. He didn't resist. In fact, he nestled into her arms, as if he'd done it 100 times before. Carrying him back was not easy. He was heavier than he looked, and the path was thick with roots and rocks, but she never stopped. When she reached the edge of her village, she ducked behind a pile of clay pots and waited for her brothers to pass. No one could see. No one could know. Not yet. At home, her grandmother's eyes widened, not with anger, but recognition. She didn't say a word. Instead, she reached for a bowl of goat's milk and warmed it by the fire. "You've brought home something brave," she said at last. Amara looked down at the cub, who blinked up at her slowly, as if already beginning to trust her. "I'm going to name him Simba," she whispered. And just like that, something wild and wonderful began. From the moment Simba took his first clumsy steps across the floor of their small hut, it was clear that this was no ordinary bond. He wasn't just a rescued animal, he was family. Amara fed him warm goat's milk by hand, wiped his muddy paws each morning, and wrapped him in a woven blanket at night. At first, he slept beside the hearth, curled into a tight golden ball. By the end of the week, he was climbing into her lap like a sleepy cat, despite already being nearly twice the size. Her grandmother helped when she could, teaching Amara how to grind herbs into poultices for Simba's scratches and how to listen for changes in his breathing. "He's not meant for cages," she said softly one evening. "But for now, your arms are the safest place he knows." Amara nodded but didn't say anything. She already knew. The village was small, and secrets never stayed hidden for long. Amara kept Simba out of sight during the day, letting him stretch and play only when no one else was near. But his playful growls grew louder as he got stronger. His paw prints in the mud became impossible to mistake. Whispers started, strange sounds in the night, missing hens, shadowy figures slipping past fences. Still, in Amara's world, there was only Simba. She spoke to him as if he understood every word, telling him stories from school, singing lullabies, as she once had to her baby brother. And Simba listened. When she cried, he nuzzled her cheek. When she laughed, he pawed at her braid with a clumsy gentleness that made her heart ache. She taught him games, how to follow the sound of her whistle, how to pounce on straw bundles she tossed like prey. They would chase each other through the trees behind her home until they both collapsed, exhausted and happy, under the sky. One afternoon, Amara pressed her forehead gently against Simba's and whispered, "You're my best friend." He responded with a low, humming sound, a sound that always made her feel safe, even when everything else felt uncertain. Her grandmother watched them from the doorway, silent, her hands folded. She knew this couldn't last. Nature doesn't pause for love. But in that moment, there was only the sound of Simba's soft purr and the steady heartbeat of the girl who had given him not just food and shelter, but something far deeper. She had given him a name, and with it, a place in the world. Simba grew quickly, quicker than anyone expected. What had once been soft, wobbly steps turned into powerful strides. His body stretched out, muscles forming beneath his golden coat, and his playful swats became strong enough to knock over baskets and tip clay pots. Amara began to feel the shift, slow and subtle, like the change in seasons. Simba was still gentle with her, still calm, but there was something in his eyes now, something older, more aware. She tried to ignore it at first. When he accidentally ripped her shawl during a game of chase, she stitched it back without a word. When he growled at a rooster that wandered too close, she scolded him gently, but he didn't lower his eyes the way he used to. He was changing, and no amount of love could stop it. The neighbors noticed too. One morning, a man from 2 houses down came knocking. His chickens were missing. Another neighbor claimed to have seen something large moving through their yard at night. No one blamed Amara directly, but the questions were sharpening. Her father sat her down by the fire that evening. His hands were calloused from years of work, his voice steady but kind. "Amara," he said, "you love him, I know, but he's not a child anymore. He's a lion, and lions don't belong in houses." Amara didn't answer right away. She looked over at Simba, curled near the fire, blinking lazily. He didn't understand. How could he? This was his home. Later that week, a ranger from the nearby wildlife reserve came to speak with the village elders. He was calm, respectful, but firm. He had heard the stories. If there truly was a young lion being kept in secret, it was time he returned to the wild, under careful guidance for his safety and for everyone else's. That night, Amara sat awake with Simba, stroking the fur behind his ears. "They want to take you away," she whispered. Simba licked her hand gently, his breath warm, his eyes trusting. When morning came, she didn't run. She didn't hide him. With tears in her eyes, she led him down the path toward the ranger's truck. As they reached the gate, Simba paused and turned, brushing his head against her chest one last time. "I'll never forget you," she whispered, holding on just a moment longer. And then he was gone. Life went on, as it always does. The hut stayed the same, the forest whispered the same songs, but something inside Amara had changed. Without Simba, the house felt too quiet. She would wake at night, expecting to hear the soft rhythm of his breathing beside the hearth. Sometimes, in the early morning mist, she swore she could still see the shape of him walking behind her through the trees, but it always vanished when she turned. Her days became filled with school, chores, and responsibilities. She threw herself into her studies, fueled by a silent promise. If she couldn't keep Simba, then she would protect others like him. When she left the village at 16 to attend a wildlife education program in the city, she carried no photos, only memories. Amara was different from the other students. While many dreamed of becoming veterinarians or zookeepers, she talked about habitats, migration patterns, and what it meant to let wild creatures stay wild. Her professors took notice. They admired her dedication, though none knew the real story behind it. In her dorm room, she kept a small carved wooden lion, something her grandmother had given her the night before she left home. "So he can watch over you now," her grandmother had said, pressing it into her palm. Sometimes, Amara would sit at the window late at night, the city lights buzzing around her, and wonder where Simba was. Had he found a pride? Did he remember her voice? Did he still chase shadows in the grass like he used to? Letters from home were rare, but whenever they came, she scanned them for news from the reserve. None came. She searched online, hoping to stumble across a report, a photo, anything that might give her a sign. But wild lions weren't celebrities. They weren't easy to follow. By the time she graduated, Amara had become known for her quiet strength and fierce passion. She didn't chase headlines or praise. She simply wanted to return, back to the forest, back to the place where something wild had once trusted her completely. She never said his name aloud anymore. It was too precious, too heavy with meaning. But she carried it with her, always. In every classroom, every field trip, every animal she studied, there was a part of her still hoping, still waiting, for a sign that the bond they once shared hadn't disappeared completely. And somewhere deep inside, she knew their story wasn't over yet. It had been nearly a decade since she last walked the dirt path that led from her family's hut to the edge of the forest. Amara, now 23, returned to her village with a backpack full of field notes and a heart full of purpose. She had been hired as a research assistant for a conservation project focused on lion populations near the very reserve where she had last seen Simba. The forest looked the same, but Amara didn't. Her steps were steadier, her gaze sharper, but something in her softened as she stood beneath the trees she had once played beneath. The air smelled like memory, earthy, wild, and alive. The team she worked with was small but passionate. They set up motion-triggered cameras, tracked lion movements, and documented behavioral patterns. It was the work Amara had dreamed of for years. Yet every time she saw a lion on the screen or in the distance through binoculars, her heart raced in a way that had nothing to do with science. One evening, while reviewing the latest camera footage in the field tent, she paused mid-scroll. There he was. At least, it looked like him. A large male lion, broad and regal, paused in the clearing with a slow, confident gait. But it wasn't just his size or stride that caught her breath. It was the scar. A thin line above his right eye, barely noticeable, but unmistakable to her. She had seen that scar form years ago, when Simba had tried to climb a woodpile behind the house and slipped. No other lion would have it in the same place, in the same shape. Her hands trembled as she rewound the footage, zooming in as far as the resolution would allow. The camera had only caught a glimpse before he disappeared into the brush. But that second, that fleeting second, was enough. She stepped out of the tent and stared into the forest. The sun was sinking low, casting long shadows between the trees. Somewhere out there, the lion with the familiar eyes and quiet grace was walking beneath the same sky. Amara didn't say anything to the others. Not yet. Part of her feared they wouldn't believe her. Another part feared they would. But deep inside, something old and bright stirred. The forest had taken him once. Now it felt like it was offering him back. And Amara knew one thing with certainty. Fate had brought her here for a reason. The next morning was thick with mist and anticipation. Amara barely touched her tea, her eyes flicking toward the forest as if it might speak. She finally gathered her notebook, slung the camera over her shoulder, and joined the rangers for their scheduled survey. The path to the clearing was familiar, but Amara felt like she was walking through a dream. Every rustle in the leaves made her heart skip. She didn't tell the others why her steps quickened. She just hoped. As they neared the clearing, the ranger beside her suddenly raised a hand, signaling everyone to stop. Something was moving just beyond the brush. They stood in silence, the forest holding its breath. Then, from the shadows, a lion stepped forward, tall, powerful, and breathtakingly calm. It was him. Amara knew it before she even saw the scar. The way he walked, slow and deliberate, like he remembered this place, this moment. His amber eyes swept the group, pausing on her. For a heartbeat, neither moved. "Don't move," one of the rangers whispered. But Amara wasn't afraid. She didn't flinch. Her hand lowered instinctively, gently resting against her thigh. Open, unthreatening. And the lion, impossibly, took a step closer. He didn't growl or bare his teeth. Instead, he stopped just short of the boundary, the place where the brush met the edge of the clearing. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, he lowered his head and rubbed it slowly, gently against a low-hanging tree branch, just as he had done against her shoulder so many years ago. A sound escaped Amara's throat, half gasp, half laugh. "Simba," she whispered, unable to stop herself. The lion's ears perked. He tilted his head, eyes locked on her, and let out a deep, soft rumble, somewhere between a purr and a sigh. No one spoke, even the rangers, trained to stay alert and cautious, were frozen. Cameras remained at their sides, forgotten in the gravity of the moment. Simba took one more step forward, then paused, his gaze steady. For a few long seconds, the world shrank to just the two of them. Girl and lion, heart to heart, memory to memory. Then, with a calm turn of his head, he walked back into the trees, vanishing like mist into morning light. No one said a word until he was gone. That, one ranger finally breathed, shouldn't have happened. But Amara just smiled, her eyes glistening. Yes, she said softly, it should. Word of the encounter spread through the reserve like wildfire. Rangers who had worked with lions for decades admitted they had never seen anything like it. Experts called it a coincidence, a fluke, saying that lions don't remember humans, that wild instincts always take over. But Amara knew better. Over the next few weeks, she returned to the clearing again and again. Sometimes she came alone, other times with her team. And every few days, Simba would appear, always calm, always watching, never staying long. He never approached anyone else, only her. Their reunions were quiet, almost sacred. No cages, no collars, no expectations, just two souls sharing a past the world couldn't explain. Amara didn't touch him. She didn't need to. Their connection didn't depend on touch anymore. It lived in the space between them, in the way he moved a little closer each time, in the way he lingered just a few seconds longer before returning to the trees. The forest seemed to welcome her now in ways it hadn't before. Birds didn't scatter when she walked. Deer didn't flee at her scent. Even the wind seemed softer, like it knew. One afternoon, as she sat on a log journaling, Simba appeared again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, 3 young lions, smaller, curious, followed at a distance. Cubs. His cubs, she realized. Simba looked back once, as if to tell them it was safe, then turned to face her. The young ones crept forward a few steps, eyes wide and playful, before darting back behind him. They didn't understand what she was, not yet, but they trusted their father's calm. Amara's heart swelled. The cub she had once fed and bathed now had a family of his own. He had grown into the king she always knew he would be. And yet, part of him still remembered the girl who gave him a name. She watched them disappear into the forest, her notebook resting in her lap, blank. There were no words strong enough to hold what she had seen. Later that evening, she sat with the ranger who had doubted her at first. He handed her a cup of tea and said nothing for a while. Finally, he asked, "Do you think he really knows who you are?" She looked out at the moonlit trees, the path they had walked so long ago, and whispered, "He never forgot." And neither had she. The years passed, and the forest continued to thrive, wild and untamed. Amara's work with the lion tracking project grew more focused and vital, but the bond with Simba remained unspoken, a quiet thread woven into the fabric of her life. He came and went, sometimes showing up with his pride, other times appearing alone in the twilight hours. Amara no longer felt the need to search for him. She knew when he was near, and when he wasn't, she carried him with her in her heart. It wasn't the same as before. There was no physical closeness, no brushing his fur against her cheek, but it was enough. Their story had found its place in the world, where it would stay forever, untouched by time. On a crisp morning, a few years after their first reunion, Amara stood by the edge of the reserve, gazing out at the vast stretch of forest. The sun had just risen, casting a warm golden hue over the trees. She felt a familiar stir in her chest, a quiet pull in the air. She knew it, just as she had known all those years ago. Simba was nearby. And then, as if summoned by the very thought, a shadow moved through the trees. Amara's breath caught in her throat. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was Simba, older, his coat thicker, but still the lion she had once held in her arms. He didn't approach her this time, didn't even step closer. He simply stood there, watching her with his golden eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at her with such innocent trust. His pride was behind him, a silent testament to the wild, to the life he had built for himself. And yet there was no mistaking the recognition in his gaze. For a long while, they stood there, the forest surrounding them in a quiet, sacred silence. Amara smiled softly, the years of longing and wondering melting into the present moment. Simba's journey had taken him far, but somehow he had found his way back to her. As she turned to leave, knowing he wouldn't follow this time, Amara whispered under her breath, "I'll always remember you, Simba. I'll always be yours." And with that, she walked away, knowing that sometimes love doesn't need to be spoken. It simply is, quiet, enduring, and eternal. Simba watched her disappear into the trees, a silent guardian over the forest, and though they were worlds apart, something deep in his soul whispered the same truth. He had never forgotten her.